Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe. We're so happy to have you with us today. Whether you're listening from your home, your car, or your favorite study spot, thank you for joining our global learning community. I'm Adam, and I'm here with my co-host Julia. Together, we'll explore one of the most important and complex stories in the world of international economics, the ongoing trade war between the United States and China.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be back with you. Today's topic is US versus China. Trade war escalates with new tariff surge. It's one of the most talked about global issues right now, and it's shaping the future of international business, politics, and technology. Whether you're an English learner, a student of international relations, or simply someone curious about world affairs, this episode will help you understand what's happening, why it matters, and how it affects people all over the world.
Before we dive in, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to like this video if you enjoy learning English through real-world topics. Don't forget to subscribe to the English Globe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our new podcasts. And we'd love to know, where are you listening from today? Tell us in the comments below and share your thoughts about this trade war between two of the world's most powerful nations. Your feedback helps us make every episode better for learners like you.
Now let's begin. To understand what's going on between the US and China, we first need to understand what a trade war actually means. In simple terms, a trade war happens when two or more countries start placing taxes, known as tariffs, on each other's goods. These taxes make imported products more expensive. Governments do this to protect their own industries or to pressure other countries to change their trade behavior. But in the long run, a trade war often hurts both sides, as prices rise and international cooperation weakens.
Exactly. The trade war between the United States and China is not new. It began several years ago, but has recently become more intense because of a new surge in tariffs. The U.S. government has increased import taxes on several Chinese goods, including electric vehicles, technology components, and solar panels. China, in response, has raised its own tariffs on American agricultural products and technology parts. This back-and-forth escalation has brought global attention once again to the world's two largest economies.
What makes this topic so important is that it doesn't just affect these two countries. The US and China together represent almost 40% of the global economy. When they clash, the entire world feels the impact, from big corporations to small family businesses. Trade tensions can change the prices of everyday products, from smartphones to clothing, and even influence job markets and currency exchange rates. That's why understanding this topic is essential, not only for economists, but also for everyday people who want to stay informed.
And for English learners, this topic offers something even more valuable. It helps you expand your vocabulary and comprehension through real global issues. Today, we'll be using terms like tariffs, exports, imports, negotiations, and sanctions. These are common words in international news and business English. By listening carefully and following our explanations, you'll learn not only about the US-China trade war, but also how to discuss complex topics in English with confidence and clarity.
Let's take a moment to think about how this conflict started. The roots of this trade tension go back years. Both nations depend heavily on each other. The US imports a huge number of products from China, while China relies on American technology and agricultural goods. However, disagreements about trade fairness, intellectual property, and market access have led to repeated disputes. Over time, these disagreements turned into what we now call a trade war.
The phrase trade war might sound like a dramatic term, but it reflects real economic struggles. When countries use tariffs as a weapon, it can slow down trade, reduce profits, and make life harder for consumers. For example, when the U.S. raises tariffs on Chinese electronics, American consumers might end up paying more for laptops and smartphones. On the other side, Chinese farmers or manufacturers might suffer if their goods become too expensive to sell in American markets.
The trade war is also connected to global competition for technology and leadership. The US and China are not just trading goods. They're competing for influence in areas like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and advanced manufacturing. These industries will shape the future, and both nations want to be the leaders. This makes the situation even more complex, as every decision about tariffs and policies affects global progress and innovation.
That's right. But what's interesting is that while governments fight trade battles, ordinary people are the ones who experience the results in their daily lives. When prices rise, when supply chains slow down, or when products disappear from store shelves, that's when people start to feel the true cost of economic conflicts. So, as we move through today's episode, we'll not only talk about big numbers and global policies, but also about how this trade war connects to your daily experiences.
And don't worry if some of the words sound new or difficult. Our goal at the English Globe is to make every topic clear and easy to understand for English learners. We'll explain each key term carefully and repeat important phrases to help you remember. You can also write new words in your notebook and use them in your own sentences later. That's how your English grows stronger.
So, dear listeners, stay with us until the end of the episode. You're going to learn a lot about global economics, trade, and politics, all while improving your English listening and vocabulary skills. Remember, this is not just a news discussion. It's a learning experience designed for you. And once again, if you haven't yet, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, The English Globe, and share it with your friends who also want to learn English through world events.
Coming up next, we'll explore how this trade war actually began and what triggered the first wave of tariffs between these two superpowers. Understanding the past will help us see why tensions have returned so strongly today. So grab your notebook, get comfortable, and let's dive deeper into the fascinating world of international trade.
To truly understand the new wave of tariffs and rising tension between the US and China, we need to go back to where it all started. The trade war didn't just appear overnight. It has deep roots in decades of economic competition and political disagreement. The seeds of this conflict were planted long ago, when China began to open its economy to the world and became a global manufacturing power. Over time, its growing influence in international trade began to reshape the balance of global economics.
That's right, Adam. If we look at the history, China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. This was a major turning point. The goal was to integrate China into the global trading system and make it easier for other countries to do business with China. At first, it worked very well. American companies began to invest heavily in China because the labor was cheaper and the manufacturing process was faster. Products made in China started filling American stores. Everything from clothes to electronics, it seemed like a win-win situation at that time.
However, as years passed, things started to change. Many American workers and companies began to feel that China was benefiting much more from the trade relationship. The U.S. trade deficit with China, meaning the difference between how much America buys from China and how much it sells to China, became very large. By the mid-2000s, the U.S. was importing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods from China every year, but exporting much less in return. Some American industries started to lose jobs because of cheaper Chinese imports.
Exactly. This imbalance became one of the key reasons behind the tension. American policymakers began to argue that China was using unfair trade practices. They accused China of keeping its currency low to make its exports cheaper, and of supporting local industries with government subsidies. Things that made competition harder for foreign companies. The issue of intellectual property theft also became a big problem. US companies claimed that their technologies and ideas were being copied or shared without proper protection.
In 2018, the situation reached a boiling point. The U.S. government, under President Donald Trump, decided to take action. The administration announced a series of tariffs on Chinese goods, worth billions of dollars. These tariffs targeted products like steel, aluminum, machinery, and technology equipment. The message was clear. The U.S. wanted to pressure China to change its trade policies and create a fairer relationship. It was a dramatic move, and it marked the official beginning of what the media soon called the U.S.-China trade war.
China, of course, didn't stay silent. The Chinese government responded quickly by imposing its own tariffs on American goods. They targeted key industries like agriculture, automobiles, and energy, areas that were important for the U.S. economy. This exchange of tariffs, back and forth, step by step, continued for months. Each side tried to show its strength and protect its economic interests. The tension didn't just stay in the business world, it soon affected global markets, trade agreements, and even diplomatic relations between the two powers.
And it wasn't only about money or trade. The conflict also represented a deeper struggle for global leadership. The United States had long been the world's largest economy and a major technological leader. But China was rising fast, becoming not only a global manufacturing hub, but also an innovator in technology, artificial intelligence, and green energy. Many experts started to describe this rivalry as part of a larger strategic competition, not just about economics, but also about influence, power, and the future direction of the world economy.
That's an important point, Adam. This trade war revealed something much bigger, that both countries were competing for the same goal: to shape the global economy according to their own models. The US emphasized open markets and intellectual property protection, while China focused on government-led growth and rapid industrial development. Each system had its strengths, and each side wanted the other to adapt or change. This clash of ideas made it difficult to reach long-term agreements, even after many rounds of negotiation.
During the first years of the trade war, we saw a lot of uncertainty in international markets. Companies around the world were unsure where to invest or how to manage their supply chains. Many businesses that depended on materials from China or the US began looking for new partners in other countries like Vietnam, India, and Mexico. Economists called this trade diversion, where global supply chains started to move away from the two largest economies because of rising tariffs and unpredictable policies.
Yes, and that shift had huge effects on workers and industries. For example, American farmers faced major challenges when China placed tariffs on agricultural goods like soybeans and corn. Many of these farmers relied heavily on Chinese buyers. Suddenly, their sales dropped and their profits suffered. At the same time, Chinese factories that produced electronics and machinery faced difficulties because they couldn't export to the US as easily as before. So both sides felt the pressure. A reminder that in a global economy, every action creates a chain reaction.
That's why trade wars are often called lose-lose situations. Governments might think they're protecting their industries, but in reality, higher tariffs make goods more expensive for consumers and create uncertainty for businesses. Even countries not directly involved in the dispute can feel the effects. When global trade slows down, international growth slows too, and everyone pays a price. This shows how deeply connected the world economy has become, and why cooperation is often more effective than confrontation.
Still, it's important to remember that both the US and China have legitimate concerns. The US wants to protect its innovation, jobs, and industries from unfair competition, while China wants to maintain its economic development and defend its right to grow as a modern industrial power. Understanding both sides helps us see the situation more clearly and avoid simple conclusions. In international relations, there are rarely easy answers, only complex realities that require careful negotiation and mutual respect.
After years of tariff exchanges, Both sides eventually agreed to a Phase 1 trade deal in early 2020. The agreement included commitments from China to purchase more American goods and to strengthen intellectual property protections. In return, the U.S. reduced some tariffs but kept many others in place. While this deal reduced tension temporarily, it didn't solve the deeper structural problems between the two countries. The relationship remained fragile, and disagreements continued behind the scenes.
Then came new global challenges: the pandemic, supply chain disruptions, and shifting geopolitical tensions. These events made trade relations even more complicated. Both governments began focusing more on self-reliance and reducing dependence on each other for critical materials like semiconductors and medical supplies. The world started to see a slow decoupling, a process where the two economies tried to separate in key sectors to avoid overdependence. This trend continues today, shaping the global economy in new ways.
And now, we've reached 2025, a new stage in this long story. The U.S. has once again raised tariffs, this time targeting green technology and electric vehicles, while China has responded with its own measures. It feels like history is repeating itself, but the stakes are higher now because technology and global supply chains are more advanced and interconnected than ever before. Each side is trying to balance protection and progress, nationalism and globalization. The result is a complex and uncertain future for everyone involved.
That's a powerful summary, Adam. As we move forward in this episode, we'll explore what tariffs really are, how they function, and why they have such a strong effect on the global economy. Understanding these basic economic tools will help our listeners see how one government decision can influence prices, jobs, and trade around the world. So, dear listeners, stay tuned. The story of the trade war is just beginning, and in the next part, we'll break down how tariffs work and what role they play in this conflict.
Now that we've explored the historical background of the U.S.-China trade war, it's important to understand one key tool used in this conflict: tariffs. Simply put, a tariff is a tax that a government places on imported goods. Imagine you buy a product from another country. If a tariff is applied, that product becomes more expensive because the government adds an extra fee. Tariffs are often used to protect local industries or to encourage foreign countries to follow certain trade rules.
Exactly, Adam. Let's make it even simpler. Suppose China exports smartphones to the United States. If the US applies a tariff, the cost of those phones rises for American buyers. Companies that sell these phones may increase their prices to cover the tariff, and consumers ultimately pay more. On the other hand, tariffs can give local manufacturers an advantage because imported goods become more expensive, and people may choose to buy products made at home instead.
Tariffs can take many forms. Some are a fixed amount of money per item, while others are calculated as a percentage of the product's value. For example, a 25% tariff on a $1,000 piece of machinery adds $250 to the cost. This extra price can influence the decisions of businesses and consumers. Even a small percentage increase can have big effects when billions of dollars of goods are involved. That's why tariffs are such a powerful tool in international trade.
Another important point is that tariffs are not always meant to punish another country. Sometimes they are used to protect jobs, industries, or even the environment. Governments may raise tariffs on imported steel to support domestic steelworkers or on foreign products that don't meet environmental standards. However, in a trade war, tariffs are often used strategically to pressure a country to change policies or reduce unfair practices.
In the case of the U.S.-China trade war, tariffs have been applied to a wide range of goods. American tariffs targeted items like electronics, machinery, steel, aluminum, and agricultural products. China responded by imposing tariffs on soybeans, cars, and technology components. These measures are called retaliatory tariffs because they are a response to previous actions. The goal is to create economic pressure and encourage negotiation between the two countries.
Let's talk about the effects of tariffs on everyday life. Imagine you're buying a laptop or a smartphone made in China. If a tariff is applied, the price of that product can increase, which means your family may have to spend more money. At the same time, if tariffs make it harder for companies to export goods, some businesses might reduce production, which can lead to fewer jobs. This shows how global decisions can directly impact people's daily lives, even if they're far from the countries involved.
Tariffs also affect global supply chains, which are the networks of factories, transportation, and services that bring products to consumers. For example, a car might have parts from China, Japan, and Europe. When tariffs are imposed on any of these parts, the total cost of making the car goes up. This can slow production, reduce profits, and even change where companies decide to build factories. Supply chains are like a chain of connected links. If one link is affected by tariffs, the entire system feels the impact.
It's also important for English learners to note some vocabulary here. Words like tariff, import, export, supply chain, retaliation, and protectionism are common in global news. By listening carefully and repeating these terms, you'll be able to discuss world trade in English more confidently. Remember, understanding the meaning of these words in context is just as important as knowing the dictionary definition.
One question listeners often ask is whether tariffs actually work. The answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. In some cases, tariffs can encourage countries to negotiate and change unfair practices. In other cases, tariffs may lead to long-term economic damage, higher prices, and slower growth. For example, American farmers lost buyers in China when retaliatory tariffs were imposed. Meanwhile, consumers paid more for everyday goods, and some companies had to rethink their investments.
Another interesting effect of tariffs is that they can influence international relationships. Countries may form alliances to bypass tariffs or create alternative trade agreements. For instance, if the US imposes high tariffs on Chinese electronics, companies might source products from Vietnam, India, or Mexico instead. This strategy is called trade diversion, and it shows how interconnected the global economy is. A single tariff can reshape trade patterns across continents.
Let's also talk about tariff escalation, which is what we're seeing in 2025. This occurs when countries continuously raise tariffs in response to each other. A small tax can grow into a much larger burden over time. For example, when the US increases tariffs on electric vehicles from China, and China responds with tariffs on US agricultural products, the costs multiply. This cycle can last months or even years, affecting global markets, investment, and employment.
It's important to notice that tariffs are just one tool in a larger economic strategy. Governments also use subsidies, quotas, trade agreements, and diplomatic negotiations to influence trade. But during a trade war, tariffs are often the most visible and immediate action. They send a clear signal to the other country and to domestic industries that the government is taking protective measures.
For English learners, understanding how tariffs work also helps in reading news articles or listening to international reports. Phrases like retaliatory tariffs, import duties, and trade restrictions are repeated in newspapers and broadcasts. Learning these phrases in context, as we're doing in this podcast, will improve your comprehension and give you the confidence to discuss complex topics in English.
Finally, tariffs are not just about economics. They're about strategy and negotiation. Governments use them to achieve goals, protect industries, and sometimes gain leverage in talks. Understanding tariffs helps us see why decisions by powerful nations like the US and China can have wide-reaching effects. In the next section, we'll dive into the latest 2025 tariff surge and explain how it is reshaping the global economy, affecting industries, and influencing consumers worldwide.
So, dear listeners, keep your notebooks ready. We're moving from general concepts to current events. You'll see how history, policy, and economic strategy come together in today's world. By the end of this podcast, Not only will you understand tariffs, but you'll also be able to explain these ideas in English, a skill that is very valuable for students, professionals, and anyone curious about global affairs. Dear listeners, now that we understand what tariffs are and how they work, let's look at the current situation, the 2025 tariff surge between the United States and China. This new wave of tariffs has brought the trade war back into global headlines. Both countries have targeted key industries that are crucial to their economies. The U.S. recently increased import taxes on Chinese goods, including electric vehicles, solar panels, and technology components. This action has reignited tensions and raised concerns worldwide.
Yes, Adam. On the other side, China has responded by raising tariffs on American agricultural products, semiconductors, and industrial goods. These are areas where the United States has a competitive advantage, and China wants to protect its own industries. The exchange of tariffs demonstrates how both countries are trying to use economic measures as leverage. For learners of English, noticing the repeated phrases tariff increase, trade retaliation, and economic leverage will help you follow international news more easily.
One important aspect of this new surge is that it targets advanced technology and green energy sectors. For example, U.S. tariffs on Chinese solar panels and electric vehicles aim to encourage domestic production in the United States. At the same time, China's response on American agricultural products pressures U.S. farmers who rely heavily on Chinese buyers. This back-and-forth escalation affects not just big corporations, but also ordinary workers and consumers, showing the wide-reaching impact of these policies.
Exactly, Adam. And for English learners, it's interesting to see how global policy decisions influence everyday life. When the price of imported solar panels rises, renewable energy projects may slow down. When tariffs increase the cost of electric vehicles, consumers might delay buying cars or switch to alternatives. Farmers might face lower demand for soybeans or corn. These are all real-world consequences that illustrate how tariffs, while a government tool, have direct effects on society and the global economy.
Another factor in 2025 is the focus on supply chains. Both countries are concerned about relying too much on the other for critical goods. The U.S. wants to ensure access to technology components like semiconductors, while China wants to protect its manufacturing sector. By imposing tariffs, each country is signaling a desire for economic independence. For English learners, phrases like supply chain security and economic self-reliance are becoming common in international news reports, and understanding them helps follow global developments.
The 2025 tariff surge also highlights the complexity of modern trade. Unlike in earlier years, technology plays a much larger role now. Items like batteries for electric vehicles, computer chips, and advanced machinery are central to the conflict. These products are not only valuable economically, but are also linked to national security and technological leadership. This makes negotiations more delicate, because decisions about tariffs can affect both economic growth and long-term strategic advantages.
From a business perspective, companies on both sides have to adapt quickly. Chinese manufacturers exporting to the U.S. might look for new markets in Europe, Southeast Asia, or South America to maintain sales. American companies exporting to China may seek alternative supply sources or adjust pricing to remain competitive. This constant adaptation shows the dynamic nature of global trade and emphasizes the importance of flexibility and planning in international business.
It's also worth noting the global ripple effects. Countries that are neither the US nor China feel the impact of the tariff surge. For example, Vietnam and India have seen increased demand for electronics and textiles as companies shift production to avoid tariffs. European nations may also adjust trade policies or enter negotiations to stabilize their own economies. For English learners, this is a good opportunity to see words like ripple effect, global impact, and market adjustment in context.
In addition, Tariffs often affect prices for consumers directly. A rise in tariffs on electronics or vehicles means higher prices in stores, and sometimes reduced availability of goods. Consumers may have fewer choices or may need to pay more for similar products. This is why trade wars are sometimes described as affecting the end user, because while governments negotiate, ordinary people feel the effects on their wallets and daily life.
Another important point is how tariffs influence investment and innovation. Companies facing high tariffs might hesitate to invest in new technology or expand production, fearing increased costs and reduced profits. Similarly, research and development projects might slow down if costs rise or if supply chains are disrupted. For English learners, understanding this connection helps explain why trade policies are not just numbers. They influence innovation, employment, and the future of industries worldwide.
It's also interesting to note that tariffs can lead to negotiations. Often, governments use them as a bargaining tool, hoping the other side will compromise or change certain policies. The 2025 surge is a clear example. While tensions are high, both sides are aware that prolonged escalation could harm their economies. This delicate balance between pressure and negotiation is central to modern trade conflicts. For learners, the phrase bargaining tool is an important expression to understand in economic and political contexts.
In practical terms, the 2025 tariff surge shows how global trade has evolved. Unlike the early years of the trade war, today the focus is on technology, green energy, and strategic industries. This reflects the priorities of modern economies, where innovation, sustainability, and technological leadership are crucial. For English learners, this discussion is a great way to learn vocabulary like strategic industry, green technology, and innovation-driven economy.
Finally, it's important for our listeners to remember that these policies are constantly changing. The trade war is not static. Governments, markets, and businesses adapt quickly. One week a tariff may be applied, the next week negotiations could reduce it. Staying informed is key, and following international news while learning English can help you understand both global events and advanced vocabulary at the same time.
So, dear listeners, as we continue in the next section, we will explore the economic impact of the 2025 tariff surge, who gains, who loses, and how ordinary people and global markets are affected. Understanding these consequences will give you a deeper perspective on world economics and improve your English comprehension of complex topics. Stay with us, because the story is far from over, and the effects of this trade war reach much further than most people realize.
Dear listeners, now that we've explored the 2025 tariff surge, it's time to examine its economic impact. Tariffs may seem like numbers on paper, but they affect real people, companies, and even countries. Some industries may benefit temporarily, while others face losses. The key is to understand how different sectors respond to changes in trade policy. By studying the winners and losers, we can see the ripple effects of international decisions on everyday life, business, and global markets.
Exactly, Adam. Let's start with the United States. On one hand, tariffs can protect American manufacturers. For example, local steel and aluminum producers may see higher demand because imported metals become more expensive. This can create jobs and help struggling industries. On the other hand, tariffs also increase costs for American companies that rely on Chinese materials. Electronics firms, car manufacturers, and technology companies may face higher production expenses, which can reduce profits and slow growth.
Consumers in the U.S. also feel the effects directly. When tariffs increase the cost of imported goods like phones, computers, and electric vehicles, prices in stores rise. Families might pay hundreds of dollars more for products they use every day. At the same time, some businesses may delay hiring or reduce investment because they are uncertain about future costs. So while tariffs protect certain industries, they also create challenges for consumers and other sectors of the economy.
China experiences similar effects, but in reverse. Export industries that sell goods to the US, like electronics, machinery, and renewable energy products, may lose buyers due to higher American tariffs. Farmers who export agricultural goods also face declining demand, which can reduce income and cause financial stress. Chinese consumers, however, may not feel the impact as directly because the tariffs are mostly on exports. Nevertheless, the slowdown in export activity affects the broader economy, including employment and production levels.
The impact of tariffs is also global. Countries that trade with the US or China are indirectly affected. For example, nations like Vietnam, India, and Mexico might see increased demand for goods as companies try to avoid tariffs. This can create opportunities for economic growth in these regions. However, global supply chains become more complex and expensive as businesses have to adjust their production and shipping routes. For English learners, words like supply chain disruption, global spillover, and trade diversion are important terms to remember.
It's also worth noting that tariffs can slow down overall economic growth. When imported goods are more expensive, consumers buy less, and companies spend less on production. This slowdown can affect GDP, the total value of goods and services produced in a country. For both the US and China, high tariffs can reduce growth, create uncertainty for investors, and make long-term economic planning more difficult. Even countries not directly involved in the trade war can feel the effects because global trade is highly interconnected.
Some industries benefit from tariffs more than others. For example, domestic producers of steel, aluminum, or certain technology components may gain temporary advantages over foreign competitors. These gains can protect jobs and support local businesses. However, the advantages are usually limited. In most cases, other industries face higher costs or reduced market access. Overall, tariffs rarely create permanent economic winners. They shift benefits from one sector to another while creating challenges elsewhere.
Ordinary people, of course, are often the most affected. Higher prices for imported goods mean reduced purchasing power for families. Farmers may lose revenue from foreign markets. Workers in export industries may face layoffs or reduced hours. At the same time, some companies may move production to other countries to avoid tariffs, which can affect local employment. This shows how decisions made by governments at the top level have real-life consequences for people at all levels of society.
Another important point is that tariffs influence business decisions about investment and strategy. Companies might delay building new factories, investing in new technology, or expanding operations if they face uncertain trade conditions. Investors may also be cautious, which can slow economic growth further. These indirect effects are often harder to measure, but are just as important as the immediate costs of tariffs.
Tariffs can also affect innovation and competitiveness. Companies that rely on imported technology or materials may find it harder to develop new products. Research and development projects may be postponed due to higher costs. At the same time, domestic competitors may benefit if they can fill the gap left by more expensive imports. This creates a complex economic environment where some sectors grow while others struggle, depending on the policies in place.
It's also interesting to note the effect on global financial markets. Investors watch tariff announcements closely because they signal potential economic disruptions. Stock prices may rise or fall, and currency values can shift. For example, the Chinese yuan or the US dollar may strengthen or weaken in response to new tariffs. These financial movements impact not only traders, but also ordinary people who have savings, investments, or pensions tied to the market.
Finally, tariffs can influence long-term economic relationships. Prolonged trade disputes may encourage countries to diversify their trading partners, reducing dependence on a single nation. This process, called decoupling, can change global trade patterns and reshape the international economy. It's a reminder that trade wars are not just short-term conflicts. They can have lasting effects on business strategies, supply chains, and global economic alliances.
For English learners, discussing who wins and who loses in trade wars is an excellent way to practice vocabulary related to economics, business, and international relations. Words like export, import, tariff, GDP, decoupling, and supply chain disruption are frequently used in news articles and broadcasts. Understanding how to use these terms in context will strengthen your ability to follow global events and discuss them in English.
So, dear listeners, as we move into the next section, we will explore the global reactions to the 2025 tariff surge. We'll see how other countries and international organizations are responding, and why understanding these reactions is important for anyone following world economics. By paying attention to both policy and global responses, you'll gain a clearer picture of how trade wars affect everyone, from governments to ordinary citizens. Now that we understand the 2025 tariff surge between the US and China, it's important to explore how the rest of the world is responding. International trade is interconnected, so actions by two major economies affect countries everywhere. Let's start with the European Union. The EU has been closely monitoring the situation, and many European companies are adjusting their trade strategies to avoid disruption. Some are diversifying suppliers, while others are negotiating directly with Chinese and American partners to secure stable supply chains.
Exactly, Julia. Japan is another country that is paying close attention. As a nation with strong trade relationships with both the US and China, Japan is balancing its economic interests carefully. Japanese companies that export technology components and automobiles have been affected by uncertainty in tariffs. The government encourages firms to explore alternative markets and develop domestic resilience in critical industries. Japan's response shows how countries with complex trade networks must adapt quickly to global changes.
Then there are the ASEAN countries, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, including Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. These countries are seeing new opportunities as companies look to shift production away from China to avoid US tariffs. For example, electronics, textiles, and machinery are being increasingly manufactured in Vietnam and other ASEAN countries. Governments in the region are actively supporting foreign investment, creating incentives, and streamlining regulations to attract companies seeking alternatives to the US-China trade corridor.
Another important actor in this story is the World Trade Organization, or WTO. The WTO acts as a mediator for trade disputes and provides a framework for countries to resolve disagreements through rules and negotiations. During the trade war, the US and China have both brought cases to the WTO, claiming that certain tariffs violate international trade rules. Although the WTO cannot force countries to remove tariffs immediately, it plays a critical role in monitoring compliance and facilitating dialogue, which can prevent escalation into broader conflicts.
For English learners, it's useful to notice some important diplomatic vocabulary here. Words like sanctions, agreements, negotiations, alliances, and mediation appear frequently in international news. A sanction is a penalty imposed to influence behavior. An agreement is a formal arrangement between countries. Negotiations involve discussions to reach an understanding, and an alliance is a partnership for mutual benefit. Listening carefully to how these words are used in context helps you discuss global events confidently.
Exactly. In addition to formal organizations, countries are forming informal alliances to protect their interests. For example, some European and Asian nations are creating trade partnerships to share resources and reduce dependence on either the US or China. These alliances are designed to strengthen regional economies and provide stability during uncertain times. By watching these developments, we can see how international cooperation works alongside competition in a complex global system.
It's also important to note how countries use diplomacy to manage tensions. While tariffs are economic tools, diplomacy helps prevent escalation into broader conflicts. Leaders meet at summits, ministers hold negotiations, and trade representatives discuss compromises. For instance, the EU has suggested dialogue between the US and China to prevent further economic harm. This highlights the dual approach countries take, combining economic measures with diplomatic communication to maintain stability.
Global reactions also show how trade wars affect multinational corporations. Companies that operate in multiple countries must constantly adapt their strategies. For example, a US-based electronics company selling in China might adjust prices, relocate production, or diversify suppliers to maintain competitiveness. Similarly, a Chinese technology firm exporting to the US must consider alternative markets or negotiate directly with American partners. These decisions illustrate the practical impact of trade disputes on international business operations.
Another key point is the role of international trade agreements. Countries often rely on agreements like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, to maintain predictable trade rules. When tariffs are imposed outside these agreements, countries may invoke dispute resolution mechanisms to protect their interests. Understanding these agreements helps us see how global trade is structured and why rules matter in preventing economic conflicts.
For English learners, it's fascinating to observe how language reflects diplomacy. Terms like retaliation, compliance, mediation, and framework are commonly used in global news. By following discussions about the US-China trade war, you can practice these words in context. This not only improves vocabulary, but also develops comprehension skills, allowing you to read and listen to international reports more effectively.
Finally, it's important to remember that global reactions are not uniform. Some countries may benefit from shifts in trade patterns, while others face economic challenges. The world economy is interconnected, and each country must carefully balance its economic, political, and strategic interests. This ongoing response to tariffs shows that trade wars are not just bilateral issues. They involve multiple nations and have consequences across continents.
So, dear listeners, understanding global reactions gives you a broader perspective on the trade war. You see that international organizations like the WTO, regional alliances like ASEAN, and major economies like the EU and Japan all play a role. These reactions highlight the importance of cooperation, negotiation, and strategic planning in world trade. By following these developments, you can learn not only about economics, but also about diplomacy and international relations.
In the next section, we will explore how the trade war affects everyday life, from consumers to farmers, technology companies, and even students around the world. Understanding the human impact of tariffs will make the topic more relatable and help you discuss these ideas in English more naturally. Stay tuned, dear listeners, because we're going to connect global policy to daily life in a way that is both educational and practical.
Dear listeners, as we continue exploring the US-China trade war, one of the most important areas of competition is technology. Both nations are racing to dominate fields like artificial intelligence, 5G networks, and semiconductor production. Technology is not only economically valuable, but it is also strategically important because it shapes the future of industries, national security, and global influence. The stakes in this battle are very high, and the decisions made today will impact generations to come.
Exactly, Adam. Technology lies at the heart of this trade war. China has invested heavily in research and development to catch up with or surpass the United States in areas such as AI, robotics, and telecommunications. The US, meanwhile, seeks to maintain its leadership by protecting intellectual property, securing supply chains, and supporting innovation in key sectors. For English learners, words like innovation, research and development, intellectual property, and telecommunications are useful terms to understand the discussion.
Let's focus first on artificial intelligence. AI has become essential for industries, healthcare, finance, and even military applications. Both countries are investing billions of dollars into AI research. The US has world-leading tech companies developing software, data analysis, and autonomous systems, while China is advancing quickly in AI applications for smart cities, facial recognition, and business analytics. Whoever leads in AI will have significant advantages in productivity, security, and global influence.
Another key area is 5G networks. 5G is the next generation of mobile connectivity, offering much faster speeds, lower latency, and higher reliability than 4G. Both nations want to control this technology because it will power smart cities, autonomous vehicles, and the Internet of Things. Companies like Huawei in China and American firms like Qualcomm are central players in this race. The trade war affects which companies can sell technology internationally and which countries can access advanced networks.
Semiconductors, or computer chips, are also at the center of this conflict. Chips are essential for computers, smartphones, electric vehicles, and industrial machines. China relies heavily on imports for advanced chips, while the US dominates some of the most advanced production technologies. The new tariffs aim to protect domestic chip industries, encourage local production, and reduce dependence on the other country. This race to secure semiconductor supply chains is sometimes called tech decoupling.
Tech decoupling is an important concept for learners to understand. It means countries are trying to produce critical technologies domestically instead of relying on imports. For example, the US wants more semiconductor production within its borders, and China wants to strengthen its own chip manufacturing capabilities. This effort to achieve independence affects global trade patterns, investment decisions, and even international partnerships. Learning this term can help you follow technology news more effectively.
The battle for innovation also affects global companies. Multinational tech firms must decide where to manufacture products, source materials, and sell goods. For example, a smartphone company might move production from China to Vietnam to avoid tariffs, or source chips from multiple countries to reduce risk. These decisions are not only about costs, but also about securing reliable supply chains for critical components like AI, processors, sensors, and 5G equipment.
It's interesting for English learners to notice the vocabulary used in technology discussions. Words like autonomous, network infrastructure, chip fabrication, data analytics, and telecommunications appear frequently in news reports and tech journals. Understanding these words in context improves comprehension and allows you to explain complex topics clearly in English. Following discussions about AI, 5G, and semiconductors is a great way to expand your technical vocabulary.
Another important aspect is how governments support innovation. Both the US and China provide subsidies, tax incentives, and grants for research and development. These policies help domestic companies compete internationally. However, they also contribute to trade tensions because the other side may view them as unfair advantages. This is one reason technology has become a central focus of the trade war. Both nations see it as crucial for economic growth and national security.
Let's also consider how this affects consumers. Advanced technology like AI, 5G, and semiconductors enables faster smartphones, smarter appliances, and better healthcare solutions. Tariffs and supply chain disruptions can slow production, increase costs, and delay innovation. For example, shortages of semiconductor chips have already impacted car production worldwide. This shows how international trade policies are directly linked to the technologies we use every day.
Furthermore, this competition is reshaping global alliances. Countries with strong tech industries are forming partnerships to share knowledge and protect supply chains. For instance, Japan, South Korea, and the EU are collaborating on semiconductor research and 5G infrastructure. These alliances aim to reduce dependence on the US or China, creating a network of innovation that is resilient against trade disruptions.
English learners should also notice phrases like supply chain security, research collaboration, technology transfer, and strategic investment. These terms are common in discussions about international technology policy. By listening carefully and practicing these expressions, you'll improve your ability to discuss global tech developments in English confidently.
Finally, dear listeners, the technology battle shows how deeply economics, politics, and innovation are connected. Who leads in AI, 5G, and semiconductors will influence not only trade, but also global power, national security, and future development. By understanding this, you can see why the trade war is not just about tariffs, it's about shaping the technological landscape of the 21st century.
In the next section, we will discuss the social and educational impact of the trade war, how students, workers, and educators around the world are affected by changes in technology, trade policies, and international collaboration. We will also explore ways learners can engage with global technology topics in English, improving both their knowledge and language skills. Stay tuned, dear listeners, because the story of trade, technology, and innovation continues to unfold in fascinating ways. Dear listeners, now we shift our focus to the political side of the US-China trade conflict. Understanding the motivations behind government decisions is crucial for seeing the full picture. Leaders in both countries consider national security, global leadership, and public opinion when making trade policies. For example, tariffs are not only economic tools, they are also signals of strength, protection, and strategic planning. For English learners, terms like policy decision, national interest, diplomatic strategy, and public opinion are key to understanding political discussions.
Exactly, Julia. In the United States, trade policy is closely tied to domestic politics. Leaders want to protect American industries, support job creation, and respond to voters' concerns about globalization. Politicians often face pressure from industries that benefit from tariffs, like manufacturing, and from those that face higher costs, like technology or agriculture. Decisions about trade are therefore a mix of economic calculation and political strategy, balancing different interests to maintain support at home.
China also faces domestic pressures. Its government must protect strategic industries, ensure economic growth, and maintain social stability. Policies are designed to support technology development, infrastructure, and exports while responding to citizens' concerns about jobs and prices. For English learners, the phrase strategic industry refers to sectors that are crucial for national growth and security, and it is often used in news and official statements. Understanding these terms helps you follow political debates more clearly.
Leaders in both countries also consider international perception. Trade policies send messages to allies, competitors, and global organizations. For instance, the US uses tariffs to demonstrate economic strength and assert influence over global trade rules. China responds in ways that protect domestic interests while signaling that it will defend its economic sovereignty. Vocabulary like sovereignty, diplomatic signaling, and international standing is useful for describing these political strategies.
Public opinion plays a central role as well. Governments often justify tariffs as measures to protect citizens from unfair competition or economic threats. Leaders use speeches, press conferences, and media to explain policies, influence perceptions, and maintain legitimacy. English learners can focus on words like policy justification, media communication, and public messaging, which are frequently used when reporting on government decisions.
National security is another key motivation. Technology, energy, and critical infrastructure are at the center of trade negotiations. Leaders consider which industries are essential for the country's defense, innovation, and resilience. For example, restrictions on semiconductor exports or AI technology are not just economic moves. They are intended to safeguard long-term national interests. This shows how politics, trade, and security are interconnected.
Trade policy is also influenced by global leadership ambitions. Both the US and China aim to assert themselves as leaders in the world economy. By controlling trade flows, supporting domestic innovation, and negotiating international agreements, leaders try to shape global norms and influence other nations' decisions. Terms like global leadership, economic influence, and strategic negotiation are common in news coverage and political analysis.
English learners can also notice phrases like domestic pressure, strategic planning, policy calculus, and diplomatic leverage. These terms are frequently used in political reporting, especially when analyzing decisions made by heads of state or trade ministers. Understanding these words helps learners describe political motives and evaluate international events in English.
The political dimension also includes negotiation strategies. Governments may use tariffs as bargaining tools to encourage concessions, establish agreements, or assert leverage in international forums. Trade wars are not only about immediate economic effects, they are part of broader diplomatic strategies aimed at achieving long-term objectives. For learners, phrases like bargaining tool, negotiation leverage, and policy negotiation are important to follow political news.
Leaders must also anticipate unintended consequences. Policies that protect one sector may harm another, and decisions can influence public opinion, global alliances, and investor confidence. Political strategies involve careful calculation, scenario planning, and risk management. For English learners, the expression unintended consequences is frequently used in news and academic discussions, making it a valuable term to know.
Finally, it's important to remain neutral and educational when discussing political strategies. Understanding the reasoning behind decisions, the constraints leaders face, and the language they use can improve comprehension without taking sides. By focusing on vocabulary like strategic interest, policy analysis, negotiation stance, and domestic versus international priorities, listeners can better understand the complex interplay between politics and economics.
Dear listeners, as we move to the next section, we will explore the global economic future, what might happen next, potential resolutions, and lessons for businesses and individuals. Understanding the political strategies helps us anticipate possible outcomes and see how international decisions influence the world economy, while continuing to improve your English vocabulary in the context of politics and diplomacy. Dear listeners, we have now reached the final section of our discussion. As we reflect on the US-China trade war, it is important to consider what may happen next. The future is uncertain, and many analysts predict different outcomes depending on political decisions, negotiations, and economic conditions. One possibility is that ongoing talks could reduce tensions, leading to fewer tariffs and improved cooperation in trade and technology. However, there is also a chance that additional tariffs could be introduced, prolonging the conflict and creating more challenges for global markets.
That's right, Adam. Despite the tensions, both countries remain highly dependent on each other economically. China is a major supplier of goods, technology, and materials to the US, while the US is one of China's largest export markets. This interdependence makes it unlikely that either country will completely disengage from trade. For English learners, understanding phrases like economic interdependence, trade reliance, and mutual benefits is useful because they frequently appear in discussions about international relations.
Global markets are likely to respond to both scenarios. If negotiations succeed and tariffs are reduced, businesses may regain confidence, investment may increase, and prices for consumers could stabilize. On the other hand, if tariffs continue or escalate, companies may face higher production costs, supply chains could remain disrupted, and market volatility may persist. This uncertainty affects investors, employees, and everyday consumers worldwide, highlighting the global reach of economic policy decisions.
Another key consideration is the role of international organizations and agreements. The World Trade Organization, regional trade partnerships, and diplomatic channels may facilitate resolutions or mediate disputes. Countries and multinational corporations must adapt to changing rules and regulations while seeking opportunities to grow in a complex trade environment. Learners should note terms like dispute resolution, regulatory compliance, and multilateral negotiations, which are commonly used in economic and political discussions.
The trade war also highlights the importance of strategic planning for businesses. Companies are learning to diversify suppliers, develop alternative markets, and secure technology and materials locally where possible. These strategies reduce risk and improve resilience against global trade uncertainties. For English learners, phrases such as supply chain diversification, risk management, and strategic planning are valuable vocabulary for discussing business and economics in an international context.
For students, workers, and consumers, understanding the trade war encourages critical thinking. It shows how government policies, corporate strategies, and global markets are interconnected. By following news reports, analyzing decisions, and discussing scenarios, learners can improve both their English skills and their understanding of global economics. Words like scenario analysis, policy impact, and critical thinking are essential for engaging with these topics effectively.
Looking ahead, there are several potential outcomes. One scenario is partial resolution through negotiation, where certain sectors benefit from tariff reductions while others remain protected. Another possibility is continued escalation, leading to further tariffs, restricted technology exchanges, and prolonged uncertainty. Understanding these scenarios helps us anticipate changes in markets, prices, and employment trends, connecting international policy to practical impacts on daily life.
It is also important to remember that communication and diplomacy are crucial in shaping the future of US-China trade. Both countries must balance economic goals, political considerations, and public opinion while engaging in constructive dialogue. For English learners, phrases such as constructive dialogue, diplomatic engagement, and negotiation leverage are essential for discussing international relations clearly and accurately.
Before we conclude, let's summarize some key vocabulary we've covered throughout this podcast. Terms like tariffs, supply chain, GDP, export, import, economic interdependence, innovation, technology decoupling, negotiation leverage, and scenario analysis are central to understanding global trade discussions. By learning these words, listeners can follow news reports, discuss international economics, and express their opinions effectively in English.
Finally, dear listeners, we encourage you to think critically about global economics and communication. Trade wars are complex, but by connecting policies to everyday life, analyzing political strategies, and understanding vocabulary, you can improve your English while staying informed. The story of US-China trade shows that international decisions affect all of us, from businesses to consumers, students, and workers.
Thank you for joining us today on the English Globe. We hope this podcast has helped you understand the US-China trade conflict, its economic and political implications, and its effects on daily life. Keep practicing English, follow global events, and continue building your vocabulary.
We also invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? And what do you think about today's topic? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the English Globe for more educational podcasts. Understanding global economics is easier when we learn together and discuss it in English, one step at a time.